If this transition season, if it had a name, if you could sum it up, what name would you give it, Katie?
Gosh, that's a hard one. I feel like it might be the spring equinox. It's
Ooh,
coming out of the darkness, the times when it all just felt too hard and too cold, and coming into new things sort of budding unexpectedly, and birdsong, and just starting to feel optimistic about whatever the future holds.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for bringing it to that point of hope and renewal. Welcome to What Was, What Next. This is a podcast about the seasons of change that shape our lives. I'm Hina Thacker, and in each episode, I sit down with someone who has stepped away from what once was, be it a career, a role, a relationship, an identity, and is now finding their way through the uncertain space of what comes next. These are not stories of perfect reinvention. They're honest conversations about the in-between seasons, the moments when the old life no longer fits and the new one hasn't fully formed. If you're navigating a transition of your own, you're not alone here. There are many of us who have navigated through those same waters. So let's begin the conversation for today. Okay, here we go. I would like to welcome my next guest onto the show. And without me doing a long introduction or reading off a bio, I'd love for you, Katie, to introduce yourself to our guests in the way that you're most comfortable doing. Tell us who you are, where you are at, all of that. Over to
Okay,
you.
thank you. So I'm Katie Higginson, and I started working in the charity sector nearly 20 years ago. Um, and I've really enjoyed my career. But over the last 4 years, I've been dealing with long COVID and multiple chronic illnesses spinning out from that. And that ultimately forced me to step away from my career. So I'm now very much in that in between of sort of grieving what was and trying to figure out what's next and taking those first steps.
That's a difficult place to be in at times. What was there a moment, Katie, when you knew that okay, this is your life now, and and something has to change? Was there a moment, or did it kind of just creep up?
There wasn't a single moment, I would say. It was a sort of slow process of letting go of who I was. The actually work was kind of the last thing to go. So I was housebound. I wasn't able to do, the running, the yoga, the long walks, the socializing, seeing friends and family and so on. All of that had sort of slowly dropped away from my life, but I was still able to work remotely on reduced hours. And that was kind of the last bit of my life that I was holding on to. And I was just getting sicker and sicker. And I'd taken a full break from work to try and recover. I took a 6 month break, sorted out, an interim to cover me while I was off for 6 months, with the full intention that that would be enough to get me back. And as I was coming towards the end of that period, I was just getting sicker and sicker. And it became clear, although not so clear to me, that I couldn't I couldn't go back. And actually, what it took was my husband sitting me down and making me write a sort of pros and cons list about going back to work, to realize that I just couldn't do it. And that was a really, really hard moment to realize.
We're so grateful for the people that are around us that love us so deeply that kind of just say, look, enough, isn't it? I think I am with you on that. That sometimes we don't see it, but other people around us see it. So when you did the pros and cons list, there's a couple of things here. You said you went through a process of grief. May I ask you, Katie, are you over that process? Do we ever get over it? I don't know.
I would say I'm most of the way through it, but I don't know that I'll ever be all of the way through it. So I've definitely moved to a state of acceptance. And actually, for me, that's been the most helpful thing. And the weird thing with chronic illness is people struggle with the concept of chronic illness, right? People expect illnesses, you go through it and you get better. And I have people saying to me things like, oh, don't give up hope. And actually, the thing that has improved my life immeasurably has been the giving up of hope, the giving up of the striving for a recovery that is less and less likely to happen. So I think I will likely never get back to the full capacity and the person that I was before. But what letting go of that has done is allow me to start to build the best life that I can within the constraints that I have now. And that's been so nourishing, really. It's been a wonderful journey for me to go on, and grieving was part of that. So I had definitely a good few months of just feeling so devastated and so unsure of who I am. If I am not that capable, professional, committed person who is making a difference to the world, then who am I? And that sort of took me a while to grieve. And part of sort of coming out of that was, very fortunately, I was diagnosed with a chronic illness called POTS, which has got treatment, unlike long COVID. So I was able to recover a little bit of capacity with that. And that allowed me to start to imagine what my life could be like now.
It's interesting because you said, thankfully, I was diagnosed with. Can you expand on that? What are you thankful about? Why are you thankful about having that?
I'm thankful because there is treatment. That's something that there is
Yeah.
treatment for. So it's understood, the sort of the mechanisms of how it works is understood, and there are medications that you can take to address that. There's a whole community. One of the best things this experience of chronic illness has been discovering the communities of people online who are going through the same or have been through the same experiences. And so rather than this big amorphous long COVID label that has no clarity about what's going on and no clear path to treatment, having something that did have that was a real relief. And I saw the benefits of starting both the medication and the other kinds of symptom management. I saw the benefits of that really quickly. So, yeah, I think it's very lonely not knowing what's wrong with you, and
Yeah.
having something that you can cling on to really, really helped.
Yeah. So I'm hearing you say that, finding your tribe or finding that community really did help you. Because I think one of the challenges, I've got a client who's got a whole business. She built it many years ago because she suffered with chronic fatigue. And she said the hardest thing was any help that you could access, you had to go out. And that is a challenge in itself, to get up, get dressed, get yourself motivated to go out somewhere. And so she created this community. So you touched on the loneliness aspect because, of course, you had, I guess, also accepted the fact that you weren't going to be working in the same way. And we have a community of work people, don't we, as well? So during that transition, where did you found this, the POTS community? Where else did you find companionship? Is that a good word? In the uncertainty, if you like, the people and the rituals. What else helped you?
So, my very close friendship group is now really scattered all over the UK, in America. And so we keep in touch largely through WhatsApp groups. And, occasionally we're lucky, we're able to meet up. But we all support each other through WhatsApp groups. And I think it's, part of the life stage that we're at. So I'm 43 now. A lot of my women friends are in perimenopause, are have become parents, are being diagnosed with neurodivergence. And so I think everyone is actually going through, and illness as well. So I think everyone is actually going through some kind of change and some kind of sadness at moving from the previous life stage to wherever we're going forward to. And so although everyone's experiences are a little bit different, I think that we've all been able to support each other, and I just love my friends so much, and I feel very fortunate. Other people talk about friendships falling away because you become housebound, you become bedbound. But because my closest friendships were already online anyway, that's actually been one of the things that's been really, really helped get me through.
That's amazing. I hope they listen to this, and I hope they kind of give themselves a high five that, it sounds like a wonderful group to be part of. And I guess your friendships are, I don't know, works two ways. Some friendship groups I feel like I'm performing in those. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm being a
Absolutely.
certain way because I joined them at a certain time, and there are others that are slightly deeper. Um, and there's no performance involved. You just show up as you are. And so, is there something that you felt? Is there a way that you were pre COVID, and then you just kind of decided that that was a performance and you were just going to stop doing that?
Yeah, it's difficult to know. I think one of the things for me is I've always been very sort of shy and quite socially awkward, and I've had to learn how to kind of get round that over the years. So in some ways, a lot of it is performance for me because it's a bit of a fake it till you make it kind of thing, and that's sort of worked for me quite well. But I think probably the thing that's shifted most for me over the past few years is I always found it very difficult to say no to people. And so I'd always take on more than really I could manage. And particularly when I, started managing people and eventually became a CEO of a charity, I'm very, very all about compassionate leadership. And that often meant when my people working to me were struggling, I would take some of the load off their shoulders, pile it on myself. And I didn't have like a line. I didn't have a limit on that. I would just take it on and deal with it. And I think one of the things that this has taught me is that I have to say no. I physically can't do things, but also it's not just that I reach my limit and I have to stop. I actually have to plan my energy really carefully. One of the hardest things about me, which a lot of people with long COVID experience, is something called post-exertional malaise or post-exertional neuroimmune exacerbation. And that is where you get a huge flare of all of your symptoms after some kind of exertion. And that can be physical, it can be cognitive exertion, it can be emotional exertion. And it doesn't hit. It's not like having aching muscles at the end of a run. It can
Hmm.
take up to 3 days for that to hit. So you can think that you've maybe got away with that nice time that you had with your friends the other day. And actually, 3 days later, you're in bed in a darkened room, unable to have any kind of sensory input at all. No, no screens, no reading, no audiobooks. So having to actually think ahead and plan, not just get up to my limit and stop, but actually stop well before I'm hitting my limit so that I can protect that baseline.
Gosh, Katie, I want to, because something that you just mentioned is, as the CEO of a charity, as somebody who obviously genuinely cares about other people in the world, you had this sense of responsibility. If your team couldn't do it, you would take on the task. And I talk about that a lot. Katie, really come across this term called burn on. Are you familiar with that?
No.
I will share some information with you outside of this. But it's the the research is not as well known in the UK as it came out of Germany actually. But it's this concept of somebody who has a heightened sense of responsibility, who will just keep giving and giving, and they wear a mask of competence. So it's like I do a lot of work with people who work in the NHS, and it's people who will take annual leave because they are forced to take annual leave, but then will go and do a locum shift because they don't want to leave their ward short and things like that. And I know you're very familiar with the NHS. So, it's that kind of person. So that sense of responsibility that you touched on, how has that reconciliation been for you? Because obviously you had that your whole life.
Yeah, it's absolutely something I still struggle with. And I'm still not always good at saying a complete no in the
Mm,
beginning. If
mm.
I'm asked to do something, I might have to say, "Oh, can I think about it?" When in my heart, I know the answer is no, I can't do that. But I still really struggle with that sense of responsibility to others. And also, I just want to be able to do it. I'm not saying no really out of choice. And so yeah, so I definitely do still really struggle with that. But I also have a responsibility to my husband and the people I love. And when I was at my sickest, I couldn't spend any time with my nieces who are so important to me. And so part of it is actually trying to remember that responsibility as well, that it's not that looking after myself is not just about me, it's about the people I love as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think actually it is about us as well because, it reminds me of values. Like people will say, I live and work by my values. And if, it's like you value your team, so you don't want to overload them. So you will do some of the work because you have a sense of responsibility towards looking after your team. And I think we should turn that mirror on ourselves and say, does that make sense? I don't know if I've articulated that properly.
Yeah, it does. And I think there's something about, fitting the oxygen mask to yourself before you fit it to somebody else. You can't actually help them, support them, be there for them if you're not there for yourself first.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a hard
And
lesson
it's
to learn.
yes, very hot, especially when it's forced on you, which it often is, right? When you have that big sense of responsibility, the universe kind of has to stop you in your tracks sometimes. So, is there something, if I was to ask you, Katie, what is it that you know now about yourself is there something you know now that you will never go back to?
I hope that I will never go back to a job that is so all consuming. I loved it, but it's only since stepping away from it that I can see how much it actually did impact my husband, for example. Would be very worried about me when I was working all hours and I wasn't present enough for him. And then when I was very, very sick, we've always had a really, a really equal and mutually supportive relationship. And when I was too sick to be there for him for quite a long time. So, yeah, so I hope I'll never go back to something so all consuming and make sure that there is space in my life for the other things and the other things, excuse me, and the other things that were important to me too. So, like I said, all the things that I enjoyed fell away from my life. And the last thing to go was work. And that was probably the wrong order. That was probably the wrong way round to approach it. So I hope I will take forward a much more balanced approach to life and a much more, a way of looking after myself and putting myself first a lot more.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's so important that we look at that aspect of things and say, what is it that I don't want to go back to? I want to touch on work and what you're doing now, but in all of that, Katie, what's still unresolved, and are you okay with it being unresolved?
I think that a really core part of me is wanting to make a difference, just wanting to leave the world a slightly better place. And to do a little bit of work, whether that's paid or voluntary, that is just making a little bit of a difference somewhere. And I don't think that will ever change. I can't see that. I felt like I'd really lost who I was when I couldn't do that at all. So from being um, bedbound and unable to sit up for more than a few minutes at a time to actually able to sit upright, sit at a computer for a few hours, I started to look around and think, well, what can I do? What can I do that's going to be within my physical capacity, but that's going to allow me to feel like I'm having that contribution to the world again. And so I looked around, and a lot of the work that I'd done before I became sick was actually trying to bring the charity sector and the NHS into a better working relationship. So part of the sort of integrated health and care agenda. And I really enjoyed that work. So I saw that my local NHS trust was recruiting for non-executive directors, and I put my name into the hat, and I went along for my first in-person meeting in nearly 2 years. Was the interview for that role, and I came out of that just absolutely exhilarated, that I thought, even if I don't get this opportunity, I've just proved to myself that person is still there. I can still be that capable professional person. So I'm now an associate non-executive director there, and it's been just a wonderful experience over the past year and a bit through what is quite a challenging time for the NHS, but also a really exciting time of transformation.
That sounds wonderful. And I know just from the people that recommended that I invite you onto this podcast, I know that your contribution is highly thought of. And, people are excited to see the impact that you have. It's interesting. I don't know if this is a bit challenging, Katie, but why is it that we sometimes feel that the job that we do and who we are connected?
Well, I think part of it is just how much work consumes of your life. Even if you just work a 9 to 5, that's still the majority of your waking hours in the week is at work. So inevitably, it's going to be a big part of your life and your thoughts. But I think for me especially, my work's been very much driven by my values, and so it is just so connected to who I am or how I perceive myself, intrinsically. So, and I've always felt very fortunate that that I've been able to build a career in something that feels so connected to my values and who I am. So yeah, so it's so to lose that was incredibly devastating, and I don't think I'll ever let go of that person entirely.
Yeah. And so yeah, I agree. I think, it sounds like the work that you were doing, your values were at the heart of that. And so it's harder to let go of. Katie, what does the next chapter, if you like? And, I know you have your consultancy business as well. So what does that tell us a little bit about that, what you're doing there? And what does this next chapter, if you like, need or is going to ask from you that the last one didn't? So before we were, this transition phase, for you that was, what do you think this next chapter is going to ask of you?
Yeah, so I've started doing a little bit of consulting work with charities that I used to work quite closely with in the space of sort of helping them with some governance stuff, helping them with some strategy stuff, some fundraising stuff. So a little bit of kind of everything that's involved in running a charity. And it's felt really good to get back into it. It's felt really good to be kind of flexing those mental muscles, I suppose, in those spaces, but also without the same level of pressure, because it's an incredibly pressured role, an incredible amount of responsibility to be running an organization, particularly, small charities, which are often existing in a financially precarious state. And so to be able to contribute to that without having it sort of personally on my shoulders, that, people's jobs are at stake and the support that we give people is at stake, that's been incredibly helpful to me. But it's also something that I never would have chosen to do going into consultancy, into sort of freelance work. I feel like I'm not built for the hustle. I would never have chosen to go out and sort of try to drum up business for myself. And so that's something that I'm trying to wrap my head around and come to terms with. And so for the time being, I'm just dipping my toe in the water really, and trying to take it slow and keep well within my capacity health wise. So I've been working with charities and with charity CEOs who I already know, but I'm conscious that that's not going to always be the way it works, and that I have to start to think about how I put myself out there and how I promote my consulting business, and it feels quite scary.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there are many of us in that same boat. When you go out on your own, there are many of us, and especially if you've grown up in an organization and a corporate structure of some kind, it is scary. But actually, they say, and I don't know if you've heard this as well, but I think you're 5 people away from the person that you need to be connected to in order to move forward. So, um, yeah, who knows, Katie? Who
Yeah,
knows where this
absolutely.
conversation might lead to? So, in terms of the work that you've set up, tell us a little bit. What are the services that you're offering? Actually,
Yeah, so a little bit of anything to do with running a charity, really. So I've
okay,
done program management stuff. So I've helped get a project up and running and then handed it over when they've recruited the right person. I've just taken some of the kind of boring stuff that just never quite makes it to the top of the to-do list. So I've written a load of policies for people. Been working on a sustainability review for a charity that's in a bit of a recovery phase, trying to look ahead and think about their financial sustainability and what their strategy could look like going forward to secure that future for that organisation. And I've done a little bit of fundraising as well. So I spent a big chunk of my career working as a grant maker. So on the giving the money out side of things, which I can tell you is a lot easier than trying to bring the money in.
Yeah.
But that experience has, I think, really, really helped me understand what funders are looking for and help charities write the kind of bid that's going to really show off their project to in its best light, and hopefully chime with that funder that they're applying.
Yeah. It sounds like you're like a little bit of magic that somebody could have on their team if they were so inclined. So thank you. I wish you all the best with that. And as we kind of draw to a close for this conversation, I just want to ask you a couple of things. If this transition season, if it had a name, if you could sum it up, what name would you give it, Katie?
Gosh, that's a hard one. I feel like it might be the spring equinox. It's
Ooh.
coming out of the darkness, the times when it all just felt too hard and too cold, and coming into new things sort of budding unexpectedly, and birdsong, and just starting to feel optimistic about whatever the future holds.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for bringing it to that point of hope and renewal, and that's when we're in that phase, we need to hear that from other people who've been through it, haven't you? So on that note, what would you tell somebody standing at the beginning of what you have just walked through, to be able to feel and hear the bird song and feel the spring air? What would you tell somebody who was standing at the beginning of that?
I would say don't worry too much about the plan, about how that path is going to take you through whatever it is you have to go through. I think just try to stay true to yourself, listen to your body, and look after yourself. Just trust that things will get better. They might not get better in the way that you want or think that they ought to, but you'll get through to a better place than you're in now.
That sounds like a wonderful place to leave the conversation for today, Katie. I just want to thank you so, so much for just being so open. I feel like you were so open with the struggles and how you've come out onto the other side. So appreciate that so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to What Was, What Next. Every story that we share here is a reminder that life moves in seasons, and that the space between what was and what comes next is not a failure, but part of the journey. So if this conversation resonated with you, please do share it with someone who might need to hear it as well. Until next time, take care of yourselves in whatever season you're in. And remember, the season that makes no sense today may be the one that shapes the future for you. So embrace it in all its glory. Till next time.